Hey, fifth grade. Here's a quick intro into rock and roll, especially from the blues. So, rock and roll sort of really started to get going around 1948, 49, 1950, due to a couple of key changes in the way that technology was affecting music. Things like the electric guitar started to be really popularized. I think it was 1948 that Fender came out with its first electric guitar that it mass produced and sold everywhere. And so this was letting, bands get totally new sounds, amplifying guitar over a lot of other instruments so you could hear it because guitars aren't that loud by themselves. It was also a new recording practices and technologies were starting to happen where you could record yourself a lot easier, or you could go to like a local recording studio and do it there. And this let sort of smaller groups with less maybe like money or experience form and just sign on to a record label and immediately get an album out. Um, it moved specifically from the blues through artists such as like Chuck Berry. He was sort of considered, they called him, I think, like the father of rock and roll because he really was the one who started to sort of inhabit that lifestyle of rock and roll. And you'll like hear in his lyrics of some of the songs we're going to be looking at that he like actually in his songs defines what rock and roll is and like lays out that it's like this thing you got to move to, this thing you got to feel, this thing that has like a hard driving rhythm. And so it was similar to the blues in that it used a lot of the same chords, a lot of the same time signatures. A lot of 4/4 was really standard. Straight ahead chords, your 1, your 4 chord, your 5 chord. But it started to just move away from that sort of more laid back blues feel, which is a little bit more like singing your soul, like how hard things are, and kind of move forward to like a more energetic sort of idea of what music could be. And so it was still like the blues, a lot of guitar driven things. But now all of a sudden you were amplified, and that's one of the things that Chuck Berry took and ran with because he came from a blues background, and he really made that transition over. Other artists who started appearing and really popularized the rock and roll were performers like Elvis Presley, who came from a more country background and was obviously white, but loved that sort of more gospel blues, sort of African American style, and took that into his music. And some say co-opted it, and there's a little bit of debate over, whether he should get credit for a lot of his music because it was so heavily influenced, and his style was so heavily influenced by what came out of the black culture. But regardless of all that, he was still a huge name and a huge icon of what rock and roll was, kind of that counterculture, rebel, sort of, fighting against the power a little bit, but not too much, especially back in like the 50s. Like they weren't doing that as much. It was just like small counterculture things where they would like wear the leather jackets and look cool and always be a little bit reserved and aloof. So rock and roll really got its start because it was really sort of a mishmash of all these other styles. The blues, country, gospel music was a huge part of it. Kind of that wailing, full-bodied sound that you get. So that's sort of where we're going to jump into rock and roll. And I'll list real quick in case you missed them during my talk, sort of a couple or few of the things that sort of came out of the blues. You have your 3 chords, your 3 standard chords that everyone's using. You have your 4/4 time signature that was still really, really common. You had that kind of expressing one's deep self aspect of it, like the blues. It just had to move a little bit, and they would add drums and a 4-piece band a little bit more. So you can use those. You can talk about a few others. Chuck Berry was a huge bridge between the two. But yeah, that's sort of your intro to rock and roll.